The general's voice cut through the grand auditorium like a blade. "Major General Reynolds, please come forward for your promotion ceremony." The words hung heavy in the air. My brother Ethan froze mid-laugh, his glass slipping from his fingers and shattering loudly on the polished marble floor. The sharp crash echoed like a gunshot. Every head in the room turned. My mother's hand flew to her mouth in shock. My father retired. Colonel David Reynolds sat rigid, his face draining of all color. And Ethan, the golden boy of our family, stared at me as if I had risen from the dead, wearing 2 silver stars on my shoulders. I rose slowly from my seat in the VIP section, the weight of those stars grounding me. The entire audience began to stand in a wave of respect, hundreds of uniforms rising as one. In that powerful moment, all I could feel was the quiet triumph of 14 years of silence finally breaking open. It had started earlier that same morning, under a bright May sky at Fort Bragg. The air carried the fresh scent of cut grass, warm asphalt, and distant jet fuel. I had deliberately worn a civilian beige trench coat over my uniform as I approached the security checkpoint for my brother's promotion ceremony. Today was supposed to be Ethan's day, his moment to shine as the Reynolds family's pride and joy. The young staff sergeant scanned my ID and frowned. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There's no Sophia Reynolds on the guest list for Major Ethan Reynolds' ceremony. Only Colonel David Reynolds, Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds, and Mrs. Lauren Reynolds." The deliberate omission of my name hit like a slap. This was no accident. Before I could respond, the familiar black SUV pulled up. Ethan stepped out in his crisp dress uniform, looking every bit the confident infantry officer. My parents followed. When he saw me standing at the gate with the guard, that familiar condescending smirk appeared on his face. "Paperwork mix-up again," he said loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "My sister's been in the army for years and she's still a nobody. Should have married a real officer instead of wasting away in some office." "Keep dreaming, Sophia." My mother looked away, suddenly fascinated by her pearls. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They walked past me without another glance, leaving me at the checkpoint like an unwanted guest. The public humiliation burned hot in my chest, but I kept my face calm. I had become very good at hiding my pain. A black government sedan soon arrived. General Harlan Brooks, a 4-star commander, stepped out. His eyes found mine immediately. "There you are, Major General Reynolds," he said with clear authority. "We've been waiting for you." The staff sergeant's face went pale. He snapped to attention. "Major General Reynolds, ma'am. My deepest apologies." General Brooks placed a steady hand on my shoulder and guided me through the gate. We walked past my stunned family. I kept my gaze forward, my posture straight. The moment I had carried in silence for so long was finally approaching. As we headed toward the VIP seating, I felt the weight of everything that was about to unfold. Today, the sister they had dismissed for years would no longer remain in the shadows. The auditorium hummed with quiet anticipation as General Brooks and I took our seats in the VIP section. The air was filled with the crisp scent of wool uniforms, polished leather, and fresh floral arrangements. I sat with perfect posture, hands resting calmly in my lap, but inside a lifetime of buried emotions stirred. 14 years in the Army had led me to this moment. 14 years of living in the shadow of the Reynolds family name while carrying secrets heavier than anyone in my family could ever understand. I had always been the quieter child. While Ethan, 3 years younger, charged through life with our father's bold confidence, I observed, analyzed, and planned. My father, Colonel David Reynolds, was a decorated infantry officer who valued physical courage and battlefield leadership above all else. Ethan was his mirror, athletic, charismatic, and fearless. I was the thinker, the one who spent hours studying military strategy, intelligence operations, and cyber warfare. The first major fracture in our family came the summer Ethan received his West Point appointment. The backyard barbecue that followed was a classic Reynolds celebration, smoke rising from the grill, American flags waving and officers laughing over war stories. My father stood proudly with his arm around Ethan, declaring to everyone that this was the next generation of Reynolds warriors. I had my own envelope that week, acceptance into one of the Army's most selective intelligence and cyber operations programs. When I told my father that evening, he barely looked up from Ethan's training schedule. That's fine work, Sophia, he said distractedly. But real leadership happens in the field. Ethan's going to need to focus on physical conditioning. The pattern was set early. My accomplishments were met with polite detachment, while Ethan's every milestone became a family event. Years later, when I chose the military intelligence branch after my own commissioning, the disappointment in the room was palpable. My father set his whiskey glass down with a heavy thud. Intelligence, he said the word heavy with disapproval. That's important support work, but Reynolds women and men lead from the front. We command troops. My mother had tried to soften the blow. It might be safer this way, David. Sophia has always been so thoughtful. Safer. That word still stung. They saw me as careful, fragile, not quite strong enough for the real army they respected. They had no idea that my chosen path had become one of the most demanding and dangerous in modern warfare. In the present, as the ceremony continued around me, my mind drifted to the vault, the secure underground operations center where I had spent countless nights. No windows, the constant low hum of powerful servers, cold recycled air that smelled faintly of electronics. That was my real battlefield. I remembered one critical night 2 years ago, coordinating support for a high-stakes special operations raid. Lives hung in the balance as I analyzed multiple data streams in real time. Shadow lead. This is Reaper Element, the voice crackled in my headset. 2 minutes out. Confirm enemy positions. My analysis had prevented a deadly ambush. The mission was a success. But the next morning when Ethan called from his deployment, he had chuckled. Still pushing papers back in Virginia, sis. Must be nice and safe. Don't work too hard on those spreadsheets. I had ended the call, quickly poured myself a drink, and stared out into the darkness. The loneliness of Secret Service was a heavy burden, protecting people who dismissed me without knowing the truth. General Brooks had become both my mentor and protector over the years. When my promotion to Major General and partial declassification of my work were approved, he suggested revealing it at Ethan's ceremony. "Are you sure you want it this way, Sophia?" he had asked. I had nodded. "They've never truly seen me, sir. It's time." As the opening remarks continued in the auditorium, I glanced toward my family's seats. Ethan was smiling confidently, completely unaware of the storm approaching. My father sat with perfect military bearing, proud of his son's moment. They still believed today belonged entirely to Ethan. They had no idea the script was about to be rewritten. The ceremony continued with military precision, but I felt detached, as though watching events unfold from a distance. The 2 silver stars on my shoulders were a constant grounding presence. I sat still, allowing the memories to surface not as overwhelming waves of pain, but as chapters in a long, silent journey. The clearest memory was Ethan's West Point graduation. The sun blazed over the parade grounds as new officers marched in crisp formation. The air was thick with pride, the scent of fresh grass and blooming magnolias. When the ceremony ended, my father pulled Ethan into a tight embrace in front of hundreds of people. "That's my son," he declared, voice thick with emotion, "a true Reynolds warrior." I had stood nearby, still wearing my own uniform, holding the letter, confirming my acceptance into an elite intelligence program. When I shared the news with him that evening, his response was brief and measured. "Good for you, Sophia. Intelligence work is important, but remember the real test of leadership is out there leading troops under fire." That moment taught me an early lesson in my father's world. Only one kind of service carried real weight. Another memory, quieter but equally painful, came 3 years ago during a family Christmas gathering. Ethan had returned from deployment, filling the living room with carefully polished war stories. My father listened with rapt attention, asking detailed tactical questions. The house smelled of pine-roasted turkey and my mother's pecan pie. I had just finished a classified operation that dismantled a major terrorist financing network. The intelligence my team developed had prevented attacks and saved American lives. When I tried to share a carefully sanitized version, Ethan cut me off with a laugh. "Come on, sis. Save the computer talk for the office. We're celebrating real soldiers tonight." The room chuckled. My father simply redirected the conversation back to Ethan. I excused myself to the back porch where the cold night air stung my cheeks. In that moment of solitude, I made a quiet decision I would stop seeking their approval. My work would eventually speak for itself. These experiences didn't weaken me, they sharpened me. Every dismissal pushed me harder in the vault, the secure underground command center, where I made life and death decisions that shaped battlefields thousands of miles away. General Brooks had seen my potential early on. He became my strongest advocate, protecting the true scope of my role, while I delivered results that rarely carried my name. When the time came for my promotion to Major General and the partial declassification of Operation Sentinel Shield, he proposed the perfect stage for the reveal. Now, as the master of ceremonies finished Ethan's portion, my brother rose with effortless confidence. He accepted his promotion to major and delivered a polished speech about duty, family legacy, and sacrifice. He thanked our father for teaching him what it meant to be a warrior, our mother for her unwavering support, and his wife Lauren for being his rock. My name was never mentioned. As Ethan stepped down to warm applause, General Brooks rose from his seat. The room fell into immediate, expectant silence. A 4-star general approaching the podium without warning commanded total attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Brooks began, his voice steady and commanding. "We have one final recognition today, one that has remained hidden for years due to the highly classified nature of the operations involved." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the audience. I watched Ethan lean toward our father, whispering with a slight frown. Operation Sentinel Shield. The general continued was a long-term strategic intelligence campaign that crippled a dangerous international terrorist network. The officer who commanded it did so with exceptional skill, often under immense pressure. Today, we finally bring that service into the light. General Brooks turned his gaze directly toward me, his eyes filled with quiet pride. It is my profound honor to call forward the driving force behind Operation Sentinel Shield Major, General Sophia Reynolds. The name echoed through the grand hall. The reaction was immediate. The name echoed through the auditorium like a thunderclap. Major General Sophia Reynolds. For a fraction of a second, the entire hall fell into absolute silence. Then chaos erupted. A wave of stunned murmurs swept across the room, followed by the sound of hundreds of chairs shifting as uniformed officers and soldiers rose to their feet in a spontaneous wave of respect. The ripple moved from the front rows to the back, a sea of dress uniforms standing in honor of a fellow flag officer, but my family remained frozen in place. My father, Colonel David Reynolds, sat completely still, his face drained of all color. The man who had faced combat without flinching now looked genuinely shattered. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief as tears began streaming down her cheeks. And Ethan. Ethan looked as though someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. His face went deathly pale. The confident smirk he had worn all morning had completely vanished. His hand began to tremble violently. The glass he had been given after the first incident slipped from his fingers once again and shattered loudly on the marble floor, the sharp sound cutting through the growing applause. He didn't even look down at the broken glass. His eyes were locked on me, wide stunned and filled with a painful mix of confusion, betrayal, and dawning horror. I rose slowly from my seat and began walking toward the stage. The 2 silver stars on each shoulder caught the bright lights with every step. My dress uniform felt like armor now, no longer something to hide beneath a civilian coat. I kept my posture straight, my movements deliberate and dignified. I could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon me, but the only gazes that truly mattered were the 3 burning into my back. General Brooks met me at the podium with a firm, respectful handshake. As he pinned the Distinguished Service Medal to my chest, the cool weight of it settled against my uniform. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "You've earned every bit of this, Sophia. Hold your head high." I turned to face the audience. The applause swelled even stronger. For the first time in 14 years, I allowed myself to stand fully in my truth. No more hiding. No more pretending to be the lesser Reynolds child. General Brooks stepped forward and delivered the citation with solemn gravity. He spoke of Operation Sentinel Shield, the long-term intelligence campaign that had dismantled a major terrorist network threatening American forces. He mentioned strategic victories that saved countless lives without revealing classified details. But the message was unmistakable. The work had been exceptional. As he spoke, I watched my family absorb the truth. My father's shoulders slumped. The retired colonel, who had always preached about real service, was now staring at the 2 silver stars on his daughter's shoulders with a look of profound regret. My mother wept openly, her body shaking with silent sobs. Ethan's head was slightly bowed. His earlier bravado completely stripped away. The golden son was confronting a reality that upended everything he believed about our family. This wasn't about humiliating them. This was about finally being seen. When General Brooks finished the citation, he invited me to speak briefly. I stepped to the microphone, my voice steady and clear. I accept this honor not just for myself, I said, but for every service member who works in silence, whose contributions rarely make headlines but remain vital to our nation's defense. True service takes many forms. Today, I am grateful that some of mine can finally be acknowledged. My eyes met Ethan's across the distance for a brief moment. The brother who had mocked me for years was now facing the truth. The sister he had dismissed as a nobody had been fighting a different, equally critical war all along. The applause thundered once more as I stepped back. The shadow I had lived in for so long had finally stepped into the light. The applause continued deep and resounding, filling the grand auditorium as I stood beside General Brooks on the stage. The Distinguished Service Medal rested heavily against my chest, its ribbon a vivid splash of color against the dark blue of my dress uniform. The 2 silver stars on each shoulder caught the bright lights with every subtle movement. For the first time in my career, I was no longer invisible. I looked out across the sea of standing officers and soldiers. The spontaneous ovation from my fellow service members was genuine and humbling, a powerful show of respect from those who truly understood the weight of the rank I now wore. But my attention kept returning to the small group in the family section. They were still frozen in shock. My father sat rigid, his face pale and strained. The retired colonel, who had always demanded excellence, now looked like a man whose entire worldview had been cracked open. His eyes were fixed on the 2 silver stars on my shoulders, as if trying desperately to make sense of what he was seeing. My mother had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears flowing freely down her face. She looked devastated not by anger, but by a deep dawning realization of everything she had missed. And Ethan. My brother sat completely still, his face ashen. The confident golden boy who had mocked me just hours earlier was gone. His usual swagger had collapsed entirely. His hands were trembling in his lap. When General Brooks mentioned that certain intelligence operations had directly protected American units in active combat zones, Ethan's head snapped up sharply. His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw the exact second the truth hit him, that my work had likely crossed paths with his deployments more than once. General Brooks stepped forward again, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. Major General Sophia Reynolds has led critical strategic intelligence efforts that have shaped outcomes in ways most Americans will never know. Her leadership in Operation Sentinel Shield not only dismantled a dangerous terrorist network, but directly contributed to the safety of countless American service members in multiple theaters. He then read the official citation with solemn dignity. Though carefully worded to protect classified information, the significance of the work was unmistakable. Lives saved, attacks prevented, missions made possible through intelligence that never carried my name until today. As he spoke, I felt a profound sense of release. The lonely nights in the vault, the split-second decisions that determined whether soldiers lived or died, the years of being called a desk jockey and a nobody by the very people I had helped protect. It had all led to this moment. When General Brooks finished, he nodded toward me. I stepped to the microphone, keeping my words brief and composed. I accept this honor with deep gratitude, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotions swirling inside me. Not only for myself, but for every service member who works in silence, whose contributions are rarely seen but remain essential to our nation's security. True service is not defined by how loud it is, but by how much it matters. I am honored to stand among those who serve visible or invisible. I did not look away from my family this time. I held my head high, allowing them to truly see me, Major General Sophia Reynolds, perhaps for the first time in their lives. The applause swelled to a powerful crescendo as I stepped back from the podium. In that moment, standing tall on stage with the medal gleaming on my chest and the respect of my peers surrounding me, I felt something deep within me finally settle. The girl who had hidden her achievements. The young officer who had endured years of casual dismissal. The woman who had carried the weight of silent responsibility while being told she wasn't enough. She was gone. In her place stood a flag officer who had earned every star on her shoulders. The shadow had finally stepped fully into the light. The applause gradually faded as the formal ceremony came to an end. I had barely stepped down from the stage when I saw them approaching through the crowd, my family moving together like a wounded unit. Ethan led the way, his face flushed with a volatile mix of shock, anger, and humiliation. My father followed with stiff steps while my mother trailed behind, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The senior officers who had been congratulating me sensed the rising tension and politely excused themselves. General Brooks gave me a subtle, supportive nod and gestured toward a side hallway. A young lieutenant colonel appeared at my side. "Major General Reynolds, ma'am," he said smoothly. "There's a private conference room available if you prefer." We walked down the quiet corridor in heavy silence. The moment the heavy door closed behind us, Ethan exploded. "What the hell, Sophia?" His voice cracked with raw emotion as he paced the length of the mahogany table. "Major General, you've been a flag officer this whole time and you let us treat you like some useless desk clerk, like a nobody." He ran his hands through his hair, clearly struggling to contain himself. 14 years. You sat there and let me mock you. You let Dad lecture you about real service. Were you enjoying watching us make fools of ourselves? My father stood near the window, arms crossed tightly, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. My mother sank into a leather chair, weeping quietly. I walked calmly to the head of the table, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. My hands were steady. The years of silent endurance had prepared me for this. "I was never enjoying it, Ethan," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I was doing my job, a job that required absolute secrecy, a job that both of you made very clear wasn't worthy of a Reynolds." Ethan stopped pacing and stared at me. "You should have told us." "Told you what?" I replied evenly. "That the safe little desk job you and Mom always mentioned involved making real-time decisions that saved lives. That the intelligence work you dismissed as pushing papers actually protected American troops on the ground." I turned to face my father. "You once told me Reynolds men and women lead from the front. Do you remember that, Dad? When I chose military intelligence, you looked disappointed. So I stopped trying to explain myself. I simply did the work." The room fell into heavy silence. Then I delivered the blow I knew would cut the deepest. 2 years ago, I continued quietly, your destroyer in the Persian Gulf was nearly destroyed in a coordinated missile ambush. My team detected the threat through real-time signals intelligence. We provided the critical warning that allowed your ship to take evasive action and launch countermeasures in time. I looked directly at Ethan. "I helped save your life, brother." From behind that desk you loved to mock. Ethan staggered back a step as if physically struck. The color drained from his face completely. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The realization hit him with brutal force. My father slowly sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. He suddenly looked every one of his 68 years. All this time, I thought I was teaching my children what real service meant. I had no idea my daughter was carrying a burden I never understood. My mother's quiet sobs filled the room. "I didn't do this to humiliate you," I said softly. "I did it because I was exhausted from being erased in my own family. I wanted you to finally see me not as the lesser child, not as the disappointment, but as I truly am." Ethan looked up at me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. The arrogance had completely fallen away, leaving only raw vulnerability. "I was awful to you, Sophia," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "All those jokes about you being a paper pusher. I needed to feel superior. I needed to be the hero in Dad's eyes. I never imagined you were out there doing things I couldn't even comprehend." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." The confession hung in the air, painful but honest. I nodded slowly. I accept your apology. But respect going forward is not optional. Not for the rank on my shoulders, but for the woman who earned it. If we are going to rebuild this family, it starts with that. My father lifted his head and met my eyes for the first time since the ceremony. You've earned far more than my respect, Sophia. You've earned my pride. I only wish it hadn't taken me this long to see you clearly. The heavy tension in the room began to shift. It was no longer filled with anger, but with the difficult, necessary weight of truth and the first fragile threads of healing.